So, chances are you've seen this thing before, and it's a TNT Duper, you know from the title, but you probably also know because maybe you've constructed a tree farm before, maybe you watched a tutorial on how to dig a hole using one, like what I'm doing right now, and people just accept that these things exist. And it's this kind of ingrained nature into the Minecraft community that means that not a lot of people are actually talking about how these things work. So today I'm addressing exactly that. I'm going to talk about why this setup involving a detector rail, a fan, and some minecarts actually duplicates TNT, and why it's none of these things specifically that you actually need to pull it off. So as I said earlier, you've probably seen this thing before, and that's because it's probably only the most ubiquitous setup of TNT duping out there. It's used in a lot of beginner machines, it's simple, robust, easy for the average player to build, and that just makes it a brilliant choice for a lot of farms. But it can be a little bit difficult to understand, as I said earlier, with the strange block choices. So in order to understand how TNT duping actually works aside from the complexities, let's break it down into 3 simple things. We need the bud, I'll explain what that means. And then we need the update to the TNT and moving it at the exact same time, which I'll also explain in a moment. So let's start with the bud. So what exactly is a bud? It actually stands for Block Update Detector, and that's just because it was what it was used for back in the day, but that's not why we're going to be using it today, so that's not really relevant. What it essentially is powering a block that can be powered without it knowing that it's being powered. A good example is dust redirection. If I break this lever, it causes this dust to become a straight line, but since it's such a subtle change, the piston actually doesn't know until I place a block next to it and update it. A similar thing is quasi-connectivity. It's kind of its own can of worms, but if I place a redstone block here, it's considered to be powering this piston, yet it also doesn't know until I power it. In the case of TNT here, the method of budding we're using is actually pushing a lit detector rail with a minecart on it, because this also actually results in a budded block. And the reason this is used most commonly is because it's movable on a slime block, while all of these other methods, like redstone dust, will break. That means that we can stick it to this pretty robust contraption, and it won't destroy itself. However, when we're looking for a little bit more than just movability, the ability to stick it onto a flying machine, we'll use more stationary designs. And that'll be using dust redirection, since we don't have to move it, and that's for stuff like this, but we'll get to that later. On a slightly unrelated side note, you can actually create a pretty neat time bomb by making a lit furnace next to a budded TNT. Because the moment that it runs out of fuel or stops burning, it actually changes to an unlit furnace, which the TNT then picks up on because it gets updated, realizes it's supposed to be powered, and then blows up, quite possibly igniting a bunch of other TNT. Just something to keep in mind. But how does this help us? Because we've made some questionably safe TNT. That's all cool, but that doesn't help us duplicate it. And that's where these next 2 steps come in. And they have to come in simultaneously. We have to update the TNT and move it. What moving the TNT does, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. We move the TNT from one location to the next, this block to this block. What updating it does is, since it's being powered, it actually causes it to ignite. And you can see how we can dupe the TNT, because if we move it and ignite it at the exact same time, we create a lit TNT, and we move the TNT out of the way, thus creating a lit copy and an unlit copy. The unlit copy can then just be used again for the next TNT duping. So let's take these ideas to practice, because we're back at this original setup, and what we can see is we've got our bud, the detector rail, I showed you that. We also have our updater. This is the fire coral. An interesting property is that it kind of updates when it moves, as you can see by that breaking animation. And we have the TNT being moved by the slime. Now, an interesting thing you might notice about this design is that it only duplicates TNT when it comes back this way, when it's retracted by the piston. And I can actually show you why that happens with a little mod I have called Pist Order. And what that basically shows is the order in which these blocks move. When we push the piston, we can see that the TNT moves 4th, while the coral fan moves 5th. That means that since the TNT moves first, it's already in motion by the time the coral fan kind of wants to update it, and there's no TNT to update or ignite, nothing happens. Yet on the retraction, the coral moves first. it moves, which updates the TNT, igniting it, but then immediately after the TNT also moves, so we've got an ignited copy, and then we've got the one that's moving this way. Thus, we get two copies. We can actually see this sort of concept empirically if we look at this design, where the coil fan is actually in front, and as you can see, when it moves forward, it actually ignites instead of moving forward on the falling edge like this other machine. Lastly, we can see the final form of this contraption with a coil fan on both sides, and this one is going to duplicate on both forward and backward. So now onto the aforementioned anvil cannon. This one's from a previous video of mine. You can see it in the top right as an input card, and if we go ahead and activate it, we have 6 TNT that's duped in this tiny space, and it gets compressed and sends the anvil flying. But I don't see any slime or minecarts, so how are we pulling this off? We're going to be using the other tactic, known as dust redirection. And to show you how that works, I've gone ahead and pulled out one of the modules here. This one's a little bit longer, but the concept is the same. These modules I actually ripped off of a Dragon Slayer designed by Fallen Breath. You can check that on the description. I definitely did not design a majority of this, but I'll talk about how it works. So if I go ahead and freeze the game, and I push that button, roughly like half a second later, this piston pulls this target block up. And what that does in this context is it actually changes this target block from being here to being right here. And what that does is it changes these lines from being straight, pointing to this way and this way, to pointing in all 4 directions, which means that they're now powering these quartz blocks, which are above these TNTs. So now these are technically powered, but they're butted because we use dust redirection, which doesn't directly update the TNT, so now they're in the state ready for TNT duping. The next thing that's going to happen is these observers are going to detect each other and push this piston along. This is going to provide our movement step, and the update step is going to be provided by our handy coil fan, which as you can see activates first, as opposed to all the other TNT. We can see that happen. TNT moves, and kind of difficult to see, but yeah, you can see right now there's lit TNT in there. Unfreeze the game, and we've got TNT at the bottom. Anyways, that's TNT duping. If you want to check out more of my content, make sure to check out my channel. If you want to see more stuff like this, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see me address some other topics outside of the various projects that I work on, you can comment that down below. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.